In the Alchemi-Culture philosophy, there are 7 polar aspects of humanity that we need to look at if we hope to transform ourselves and the world around us. These are cosmology and philosophy, law and justice, economics and currency, citizenship and social dynamics, agriculture and ecology, science and technology, and healing and medicine. In this podcast, we're going to talk about these topics. We're going to expose ideas that can help inspire an alchemical transformation of our culture, one listener at a time. Hi there, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Alchemi-Culture Podcast. I'm your host, Phoenix and Liev, and today I'm joined by my dear friend, Liev Dalton. Liev is the founder and the main host of the Beyond Terrain podcast. We've chatted before in the past. I've been featured on his podcast. He's been featured on ours. So I'm very excited to welcome Liev back to the show. Liev, how are you doing, man?
Doing great, Phoenix. Thanks so much for having me back on.
Always a pleasure, brother. Always a pleasure, man. So you have been doing the Beyond Terrain podcast now for almost a year. In fact, at the time that we're recording this, it's like, what, 4 or 5 days until you hit that year-long mark, right?
Yes, sir, it is. Yeah.
That's pretty awesome. I am the most curious to ask you, what does your version of health and wellness and like terrain and things like that include now? After listening to so many different people and their takes and other things, I'm sure that you've grown a ton in your own philosophies of this stuff. So what are, some of the things, or have you put together kind of a broader worldview around what health looks like to you?
It's really interesting, and I think it kind of showcased the importance of keeping an open mind because going in, there were times where I was almost getting into a mindset where I was thinking, what else, like, what outside of my scope can I incorporate in this now? And I was trying to think, am I going to actually change my mind about these things that, I was kind of getting into like a little bit dogmatic thinking, and through the podcast, hearing all these different perspectives and almost being forced to consider them and listen to them honestly and really give them the time of day and consider it and ruminate over it. Because of course I'm re-listening to the episodes, I'm editing the episodes, I'm writing the write-ups and the timestamps. So I think that was really helpful for me to escape that closed-minded way of thinking. And there are many things that have sort of changed. May not be the best word, but I've adapted, right? I've adapted my thinking to incorporate more, trying to really ground myself in a true holistic perspective. So what one of the biggest things is I was sort of resistant to the idea that um, the psychological system, if we can sort of separate that out,
Sure.
is more important than physical toxicities or deficiencies. I think being psychologically and spiritually healthy trumps any sort of physical trauma, whether it be toxicity or deficiency. And I was certainly resistant to that at the start. But hours and hours and hours of lectures and podcasts and books and I've sort of been convinced otherwise. Not that physical um, material toxicities or deficiencies aren't important, right? They still play a role, right? They still play a role in disease and health. But that psychological aspect, I didn't understand the gravity that it had. So that's kind of just an example of something that's sort of shifted in my thinking over the last year. But it's been an amazing journey. I've learned so much. And um, I ask all my guests, like you probably remember, to define health. And if you were to ask me to define health right now, I still really wouldn't know what to say. It's sort of amazing to hear all the different ways that you can express a definition surrounding health, especially such an important central topic to our being. So it's really interesting, man. I just love the journey so far. I'm so excited to continue, and it's chatting with people like you that are really helping me develop a sound way of living and a sound philosophy and just always craving more growth, craving more knowledge. It's just really exciting.
Man, that's super cool. Well, I think that it's really awesome going back to the psychological wellness component of just overall holistic wellness and how important it is. But I'm sure that in some ways, even though you were resistant maybe to that fact, like you're like a psychology or a psychiatry student, aren't you?
Yeah, counseling psychology. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sure that like this integration, this change that's happened over this year has maybe even added context or like more importance even to the work that you're studying and the practice that you're setting up, right?
Certainly, certainly. Yeah, plays a huge role. And I think it's kind of interesting that it's the field that sort of called out to me, because I wasn't really sure where to go after like during my uh almost little crisis there of not knowing what I wanted to do in life. And I was kind of just trying to figure out what I wanted, and this psychology master's really screamed out to me, and now I just feel like it's the absolute most perfect path. So I feel like, when you're energetically aligned and you're spiritually aligned, the pieces just fall into place as they should, and I learned this information and sort of um, understood this information at the perfect time, right? So it's just so interesting how that happens. But it's like a principle now that I stand on is it's always spirit first. We always say, the mind, body, spirit, or
Yeah.
we always put the spirit last. But I had a really great guest on that said that we should put spirit first, spirit, mind, body. And I
I
think
like
that's the
that.
most important order that I would certainly address things in. So yeah, it's so interesting. You just got to align yourself and things tend to fall in place.
Totally, man. Totally. Well, that's really cool. So concerning the psychological component of disease being such an important one, what are some of the philosophies that you had talked about, or some of the different ideas that maybe stand out to you that were pivotal ones?
Yeah. I used to study a lot of Carl Jung. That's sort of how I got into psychology. And I still love Jung's work. Uh, Psychoanalysis is interesting. I do think it can get results. I think it's too long-winded to get results.
Yeah,
The
there you go.
psychoanalysts say that you need like years of analysis to become a whole integrated person. I don't necessarily think that's true. I like some of the techniques that they use, the free association, the symbolism of it. Obviously, the alchemical component is fascinating to me. And I think he explains it really well. I think the way that he approaches um, sort of the explanation of it in general, the way that he sort of rationalizes it, I think is really helpful to understand sort of an underlying philosophy of the psyche. That being said, some of the most influential things that I have been learning is sort of that connection between our psyche and our physical body. The Biggleson brothers and their father, Dr. Harvey Biggleson, have been absolutely integral for my thinking in this with their work on the microscope, the dark field microscope. You can actually see these emotional scars manifest holographically in the blood in dark field
Wow.
microscopy. Now, those who are out there using live blood analysis will say that these are hydrocells or that they're whatever structures they want to say, little nanoparticles that are coming together and creating these. It's holographic, right? And many people have known this for a very long time, but you can actually see the emotional component in a very empirical way, which I thought was mind blowing. But there are many other ways to sort of approach that philosophy, and but that sort of is the core principle now is that for a toxicity to really hold and stick in our bodies, it requires some sort of scarring, an emotional scar. We could call them traumas. It doesn't need to be a big trauma, it can be a small trauma. But these little um, stressors in our life are what allow our bodies to hold on to toxicity. So you look at the primitive, they were completely aligned with nature. And there might have been micro stressors in their life, but they didn't have the toxicity to hold on to, so they weren't developing these chronic diseases, right? So if you don't have the toxicity component, you can really manage these micro stressors. And if you are now, we live in a realm where we're all very stressed out materialistically and psychologically. You know, becoming psychologically whole can protect us from these physical stressors, from these toxicities, and even partly from deficiency. Now if you're going to be, drink a whole thing of mercury, you're probably not, there's no alignment that's going to really help you out, right? So there's still a toxicity component at play. But when we're talking about really the delicate balance of the body, our bodies are designed to be able to deal with these toxicities and these deficiencies. Our bodies are resilient, and so are our minds. Our minds play a very important role, and these stressors, these traumas, the responses to them play an important role as well. There's a reason that we block out and have sort of traumatic amnesia, as some would call it, or that we have adaptive traits, adaptive maladaptive traits, right? So you have a stressor when you're young. This shapes your worldview. You then see the world through this worldview, which is based off a stressor that occurred, but you don't face that stress anymore in your life, right? So it doesn't serve you anymore. So it becomes maladaptive, and that's what tends to create these sticky points in our life, where that's what's holding on. It manifests absolutely physically in the body, and that's what's holding on to the toxicity. And I mean, this has been talked about for so very long, and you can go back into pretty well any tradition, and you can learn about this stuff. Traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, yeah, the alchemical tradition, I'm sure, has lots to say on this topic as well. Even the more recent science coming out, many people are talking now about the connection between chronic illness and trauma, even all the comorbid disorders with, the more associated with high ACE scores, adverse childhood experiences. you know, there are so many connections being made nowadays. We're starting to see the true connection between psychological stress, traumas, and our physical health. It's really amazing. So I think um, it's a really exciting time to be talking about this stuff, because people are getting really popular. Like even like uh, Vander Kolk, Bessel van der Kolk wrote "The Body Keeps the Score."
Oh,
A
right,
really
right.
really popular book on this topic. There's obviously that doctor from Vancouver who I'm just blanking on his name. I'm going to see him here shortly. He's the Hungarian. Oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm forgetting his name. When the Body Says No, he wrote. I can't believe I'm forgetting his name. But
Okay, yeah,
anyways,
I don't know that one.
um, goodness gracious. Anyways, besides the point, it's an exciting time, and even sort of the mainstream is sort of accepting this. At least we're accepting that um, trauma plays a significant role in our health overall. So um, it's we're coming to a really interesting point where things are starting to be integrated, whether we like it or not. The field of epigenetics and neuroplasticity and our connection to trauma and health, and um, it's amazing. It's an amazing time. Yeah.
When people think of astrology in the West, they usually think of tropical astrology or Vedic astrology, both of which are imprecise and do not mirror the actual movements or the actual positions of the planets throughout the constellations of the zodiac. Even Paracelsus in the early 1500s warned that the tropical forms of astrology used by his contemporaries were entirely divorced from the true harmony of microcosm and macrocosm. Enter true sidereal astrology, created by Athen Chementi, whose system matches the positions of the planets as you can actually observe them in the sky. While we use true sidereal astrology for medical, agricultural, and laboratory applications, Athen uses true sidereal astrology for personological purposes, helping people learn more about themselves and their inherent tendencies, which can be useful in finding ideal places to live, learning how to relate to themselves and others, and learning how to have more harmonious relationships. Athen and I have worked closely for many years, and he's still the astrologer that we turn to for astrological readings and to understand our upcoming transits more fully. As an Alchemi-Culture Podcast listener, you can now get a reading from Athen for 50% off while also supporting this channel. Please use the link to Mastering the Zodiac in the description below to visit his site and to learn more. Once you have, you may also consider purchasing our astronomological calendar so you can stay up to date on all the true sidereal astrological positions of the planets throughout the year. Once again, get 50% off a reading from Athen by using the link in the description below. Let's get back to the episode.
Just to bring it back, I think maybe who you're referencing is Mate. Is that him?
Yes, Gabor Mate, exactly.
Or Mate, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it took
Yes.
me a minute. I was like, I've seen his face. I didn't realize he was Hungarian though. That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, this really begs the question then, because this is something that I've been exploring and researching in my work for quite a while. Nori's been researching this for the better part of 12 or 13 years. What is the difference significantly and clinically between an emotional toxin and a trauma? I'd like to hear your take, and then I'll share my take on it. At this point, I'm still growing, I'm still learning.
An emotional toxin and trauma. So I think I would say, the term trauma might be just a more umbrella term for an emotional toxin, because I think a trauma can also be a deficiency. It can also be what doesn't happen to you.
That's a good point.
So I think that I think there are emotional toxicities and I think there are emotional deficiencies, and I think we can just both categorize them as a trauma. That's sort of what jumps out as me. Now semantically, I might be making a mistake here, but I'd love to hear your take on this.
Okay. Yeah. This is something that I've really kind of I have some data for it, but I'm still in a phase of where I'm interpreting data. And as we know, interpretations of data can be skewed based on lots of different types of factors. So I'm not saying, just as a caveat, I'm not saying that my viewpoint on this right now is where I will be even 3 days from now, let alone like henceforth in the future. So don't take this check to the bank, basically. But it appears to me as if emotional toxicity happens when people experience events throughout the day or in their past or whatever, where it was an instance that generated an emotion where they felt that that emotion, for whatever reason, was not able to be expressed or moved through properly in that moment, and where they delay the processing of it to such a degree that it actually ends up stifling parts of their energetic constitution. Especially, we would say, like cutting down the movement of piezoelectricity through fascial planes. In Chinese medicine, we would say that it's like blocking meridians. We would say the same thing as that it's blocking nadis in the Ayurvedic tradition. So there's some component of neurophysiology there, primarily in Western terms, I would say through piezoelectricity in the fascial planes that correspond to, how energy can move and be transmitted through the fascial network, that seems to be impeded as a result of not expressing this emotion. And for instance, if it's an emotion of, say, grief, like they get really bad news that a pet just died or something, but they're in a board meeting and they don't excuse themselves and go and express the emotion the way that I think a normal human being would. There's a time limit, I think, to these things, where after that, we really either have to utilize things like hypnosis or deep talk therapy or something in order to like bring the emotion up enough to make it real again, to the point where we can express it properly. So I think that that's an emotional toxin. And it's just any emotion that gets generated that is not given permission to be felt in a timely manner. So that would be kind of the way I would look at that. Now, trauma, I was just teaching a class last Friday, a week ago, to a group from Australia and New Zealand that I've been working with, training them in Aurelian medicine. And I said, for the time being, trauma, by my definition, would be where there is some method of perception and interpretation, which I loved what you said. I'm now incorporating this, but I would just say something that was traumatic. And this means that it has an emotional component to it, and the emotions are very intense. And in that time frame, the individual is actually afraid of expressing the emotion. And that fear of expressing the emotion ends up turning into some sort of story and being backed up by memories and justifications for why I feel this way. And, it's like, in order to have these things going on, I think the psychological component needs some form of rationalization to grasp onto, to say, I am this way and I have this fear because, and whatever comes after that because statement is really not that true. It's subjectively true, and it's true. It's like, well, if I listen to what you're saying and I see it from your perspective, I could see how that would be hurtful. But at the same time, unless we can unravel that story and that justification behind those things and actually get into processing that emotion, I think that's where it becomes a trauma. So a trauma has like an electric component to it, which would be the thought, the memory, etc., as well as not just the emotion, but the fear of expressing the emotion that is then crystallized by this story or this justification, whether there's reasoning to it or not. And it seems like traumas are significantly harder to get at because they're crystallized in our persona and have actually shaped oftentimes who we are. And I mean that on the most literal of basis. So like when an emotional toxin shuts down a fascial plane or stops, piezoelectricity from happening because the fascial network is too tight or there's not enough fascial fluid flowing through that area or whatever else. That's one thing. When that happens for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 35 years in the course of a human lifetime where they haven't processed this trauma, that's like a damn near shutdown. It's like, imagine a train moving across the country. If it's shut down for 2 months, it's like, we'll probably survive. We know that we'll start getting supplies again, though, before long. If it's shut down for 35 years, everybody's given up on it. And I think that that's one of the ways that it literally changes the human physiology is by shutting down this access of network or the access to this network of information, particularly of vital electrical force that kind of keeps us going and relates energy from organ systems to smaller systems to legs and nerves and all of the other things that fascia kind of moves in, around, and through. So I think that there's definitely some sort of component there. But yeah, to get through a trauma, I think, like within the context of German New Medicine and Dr. Hammer's ideas, I am of the persuasion that his biological conflicts are oftentimes what we would refer to as traumas. Like they're things that cause a fear of experiencing the pain. And that's really important because that's also the same definition that Buddha used, Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, to determine what is suffering. And I think that that's really important. And if we take a look from 2000 years ago, maybe there's not the term trauma to be thrown around or even the idea of it the way that we conceive of it today. But suffering, I see people who are highly traumatized in a perpetual state of suffering. And that's what Buddha says. He says, pain is just a very intense sensation, but fear or suffering is the fear of experiencing pain. So I think there's something tied up in there. Those are kind of my thoughts on it at present.
Yeah. No, I really like the way you put that. That makes a lot of sense. Now, something that, and I don't disagree the way that you lay that out. I think that's well put. Um, Something that I have been noticing when working with clients and sort of exploring their history, it seems as though, and I learned a lot of this from Dr. Gabe Roberts as well. He's phenomenal. Holographic manipulation therapy, I think, is at the forefront. Um, you know, we you're able to trace back current stressors, triggers, and future anxieties all to one sort of touchstone event. You can delve right back to the root cause. And without fail, I believe that this occurs in ages 0 through 5. That's what Dr. Gabe Roberts would say. That's what Gabor Mate would say as well. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. So even with these emotional toxicities that you're talking about, first thing that comes to my mind is that they're all still aligned with these prior traumas. Because I feel like just, I can't really back this up empirically, but everything that I know the world works in a very mysterious way, that we sort of get the same lesson over and over and over again until we learn it.
Totally,
And
yeah.
it all ties back to these touchstone events that shape our worldview and our existence. And um, you can see this very clearly when you're exploring people's events. When you get to the root feeling or the fear of what's being expressed. If you trace back that underlying fear, you could trace it back to every single event that was ever traumatic
Mhm.
or an emotional toxicity, and it seems to be very consistent over time until we go back and heal. And now, there are many ways to heal. Obviously, I think we should heal the root cause, absolutely. Now, you can heal these emotional toxicities that have occurred, maybe the events that are kind of building up on top of this root cause, this
Totally,
touchstone
totally.
event. And you can heal all this, and that's kind of like symptom suppression, or like maybe you are healing a little bit in some way. But getting back to that touchstone event that you might not even remember. Dr.
Yeah.
Gay Roberts works with people who somehow can figure out that, when they were in the womb, the mother had a stress. They don't. His work is not verbal, right? It's like
Yeah.
you're working with the frequencies and you're naming the sensation and the frequency, not necessarily working with the cognitive mind here, right? You're working much deeper than that, and you're getting back to that touchstone memory and that touchstone event, that first sort of sensation that your body had that might shape your entire worldview in some sort of traumatic way, and it just builds on that. So getting to that root cause, I think, is really important. Now, of course, there's always a time and place for addressing, current triggers and stressors, and if it's very sad sometimes, like I see people come in and they're grieving a loss, and their entire life has just been grief and grief and grief and everything. They're losing everything and everyone around them now. Like, you know, trying to be sensitive around this topic, it's a very, very sad situation. And for some reason, the universe needs this individual to grow strong in this area. They need this individual to overcome this and learn this lesson to be, it's really hard. It's a very individual thing. It's almost hard to give an example without giving an actual story. So I'll refrain from doing that. But
Right.
I
Yeah.
hope my point's coming across here, where it's
Yeah.
it's a very individual thing where we're looking back and you can see that there is this pattern over time, right? And information from the moment, it's as above, so below. That is the fundamental principle. It's going to be
True.
the same thing over and over again, and you got to boil it down to that prima materia to understand what's going on at the very fundamental level, and you can see that manifest throughout your entire life. And getting back to the root cause is the absolute way to heal that. And I don't know if that sort of fits into what your thinking is here with these
Totally.
two approaches, but I just, it's something that I can't escape from, and it's not always apparent. And I think there's an attunement piece to sort of seeing this pattern, but I can't deny it.
Yeah. Well, that even strikes true for me in my experience. So, it must have been 2007, 2008, somewhere in there. I was doing a lot of work with Berkeley Psychic Institute, and there were some old recordings that we had from Louis Bostwick back in the day. I think these probably were recorded late 80s, maybe early 90s or something. But the name of the series was Going Through Your Own Birth. And it, in the Psychic Institute, we would use a lot of states of what I would later have referred to as like self-hypnosis. All hypnosis is self-hypnosis anyway. But some people allow other individuals to facilitate much better than others. And so that's really where that comes in. But we would essentially use a state of self-hypnosis and then utilize kind of, Jung's principle of imaginatio, the unadulterated imagination, to go in and just give ourselves permission to imagine what this whole process was like. And we would try to distance ourselves from whatever details we actually had. A little bit about me. I was actually born, I had to be delivered via C-section because I was breech and my umbilical cord was wrapped 7 times so tightly around my neck that they couldn't, like, it probably would have broken my neck or completely choked me if they tried to flip me around. And that's what they were initially trying to do, but it, like, the umbilical cord was just too tight. They couldn't, like, move me more than a few inches any which way. So they did an emergency C-section. Here I was. And I remember all of my grandparents and aunts and uncles and other peeps who were at my birth saying that the doctors called me Little Boy Blue because my face was blue and my hands were blue. And as soon as they unwrapped that umbilical cord around my neck, I started screaming, and they were like, "Well, his lungs work, he's okay." But that has carried through my entire life in terms of how much I fight for my self-expression. And all of the experiences that I've had throughout my life have always been, your expression is wrong, your expression is stupid, your expression is invalid, I'm not interested, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that continued to play out until this period, about 2008 or 9, when I did this work and I recognized, like, wow, this is actually one of my chorus traumas. And it happened at a moment where, like, I was due to come into the world. And in fact, if it wasn't for the surgery of a C-section, there's no chance that I would still be kicking. Like, yeah, the little amount of oxygen I had was insane. The fact that I don't have any, well, I mean, depending on who you talk to, I suppose I was going to say the fact I don't have any brain damage is amazing. But that's a matter of perspective, I'm sure. So yeah, at any rate, I can definitely relate to that just from that one experience. But then, there are a ton of other experiences as a hypnotherapist myself where I put people into really deep states where they'll go back to instances sometimes of what they perceive to be as past lives and repetitive patterns and all these other things that have forever cleared the way that they experience things, see things, etc. I was even talking with a guy recently named Jeff Polari. We were doing an interview, and unfortunately, we weren't able to stay with the whole interview due to some tech issues. But in that, he was actually getting around to the fact that just learning Taro ended up helping him heal his Lyme disease. There was something that was tied up in the lessons of the Taro that suddenly he clicked and got and understood. And all of his Lyme disease symptoms cleared up within just a period of days after this realization, recognition. So there's definitely something really big with these core foundational traumas. So that's the first thing that came to mind. The second thing that came to mind was a good friend of mine, Sean Podrick O'Donoghue. He ended up, when we were talking earlier this year at the Good Medicine Confluence, he ended up saying, Fee, everybody talks about the root issue and root cause. He's like, I even heard that in your lecture. He's like, but I want you to think about that. How many plants actually grow where there's just a single taproot, where it's just one root? He's like, I think the better term for this would be roots cause, where there's maybe one main taproot, but then lots of little branches that go off. And that tied into me to where you were talking about, like, all of these kind of other emotional toxins that kind of maybe compound on top of that root or that core. And they're kind of tendrils that are loosely connected through some sort of emotional experience, and the person's just like, man, I'm just trying to live my life, like, if it wasn't for these things I would be fine. Ironically though, my perspective as an alchemist on this is that our traumas are actually what define us and make us so beautiful and so unique and cause the different type of expressions that we have. I don't think that the traumas need to be avoided or that we need to live in a way where trauma does not exist, because I have seen a lot of kids grow up in an environment where their parents try to eliminate every trauma imaginable. And what I've seen is that smaller triggers than what we could possibly ever imagine also become equally as traumatic to them as what great triggers might have for our great grandparents living through the Depression or whatever, right? Like they didn't have food to eat. They were starving. There's like the threat of war. There's all of these other crazy things. And actually a lot of these people were still able to get it together enough to make a life for themselves, you know, get a job, be financially stable, do all this stuff, do these things. Now that those things have been sorted out for at least 2 or 3 generations, at least in North America and most developed countries, what ends up happening is that what I'm seeing is that we have so much time and space to worry about our emotions and our feelings that we take things that they would be like, I can't believe that's even an issue for you. Like, I wish I would have had things like that because it would have been nothing. And we're still blowing it out of proportion, quote unquote, into like, I remember at my quinceañera, you only got me this dress instead of this dress. And it's like super traumatic for them. So the types of traumas that we have definitely shape who we are, but I see that the less hardship that there is and the less intense the trauma actually objectively, not subjectively, because subjectively it's the same. And I don't ever want to say that people's traumas are like less intense or more intense than somebody else's, because the way that we perceive them, we feel them is still valid. But objectively, if we like take a big step back and say, yeah, but they were starving and you didn't get the right dress. Those are those are two totally different types of experiences, but they can be equally as traumatic. And so I'm almost for harder traumas. It's like, because it develops a certain type of strength and a certain type of resilience. And there's also the concept too, as alchemists, especially within the psychological realm, the whole idea is to embrace crisis and to embrace the trauma and have a process to be able to go through it so that you can break away the stories, break away the justifications, express the emotion, and then begin to direct those in areas that are actually going to make the soul and the spirit more buoyant and happier and more fulfilled, and less burdened. So yeah, anyway, those were some of the thoughts that came up while you were talking about all of that.
Yeah, no, and I think that's some great points, and I think you're getting to the individual nature of it all, right? Like it's about looking at what is maladaptive for you once you start delving into, trying to heal yourself, and heal your traumas in a way. It's about looking what's maladaptive to you, because what's maladaptive to me might not be maladaptive to you, right? We're all in our
Totally, yeah.
unique situations. And just sort of an example that popped up in my mind is like, if we can look at one of these adaptations, it's like going to war. Having PTSD symptoms is a very helpful thing to have when you're at war,
Yes, it
because you're
is.
sitting on
That keeps you
edge,
around, man.
and yeah, you need to be hyper vigilant. You need to be worrying about, sleeping with one eye open, and you need to be hardened to bad things happening around you. And but once you come home, it's not going to serve you anymore. That's not serving you anymore, right? So that's sort of what you're trying to look at, and that's the individual thing. It's like, if you're going to spend your entire life in war, then you should never sort of heal from this, because you've adapted to your environment. But if you're not going to be at war anymore, you don't need to be at least at that level. Now, it is very difficult with first responders and even people who have went to war, military, in general. It's very hard to get them to an absolute zero, right? Because there's always it shapes your worldview, right? So you're not
Oh
gonna
yeah,
just
totally.
completely, you don't forget the trauma, you just try and allow the trauma not to own you, but there's always going to be some component of it in your psyche, and it's going to shape who you are as an individual. So I think, when you're healing these traumas, you're not necessarily gonna, it's not like it's like a drastic change in personality either, right? You're not going to become a different person per se. You're going to be the same person. You're just not going to be owned by your maladaptive complexes or by the things that have happened to you. You're kind of more of an open, person, at least in some sort of way.
Totally.
You're at least ready to adapt to new situations, right? So you're ready to create new adaptations that are going to serve you now, that may not serve you in the future, but that's part of being mindful, right? And that's a big part of it too, is trying to be mindful and continuously adapting to your environment as it goes. That's sort of a goal that's been around for a very long time. Like trying not to let you know, it's very interesting. And I want to make this distinction here, because I almost said something that I would have to correct. You want to learn from what has happened to you, right? You want to learn if bad things
Yeah.
have happened to you, you want to learn from it. And that's going to shape who you are, obviously. Now, is that a trauma? I mean, you can learn from traumatic things that have happened to you. It's I think, when it becomes sort of maladaptive and, due to a trauma as the cause, is when it's out of your control. Like it's like if these things are coming out uncontrollably, like if you have anger that's coming out all the time uncontrolled, because of something that happened in the past, that is, I would say, is a problem because it's
Yeah.
absolutely uncontrolled. Now, is getting angry a bad thing? No, if someone disrespects you or your wife or, your kids, you should be angry about that. Or, you know what I
Yeah,
mean? So
that's a healthy
it's
human
a
response.
it's a normal human response. Exactly, exactly. And so you might have learned that from some traumatic experiences, but if you're going around getting angry at every little thing that happens, that's where it's a problem because it owns you and you don't own it. So that's sort of the difference, right? It's our
Yeah.
experiences obviously shape us and make us these unique individuals, but we can't let them own us. We want to learn from them and we want to own our experiences. And that's, I think, a kind of way that I would look at it.
Brilliant. So in your work, um, have you come up with any sort of like fun protocols or maybe even ideologies or strategies to own various different types of trauma?
So a couple weeks ago, I got trained in EMDR, eye
Yes.
movement desensitization and reprocessing. I think that's a really interesting thing. There's other ones like brain spotting is pretty cool as well.
Yeah.
Um, there
Which are
there are
almost the
many.
same. They're almost the same.
They're similar. They're very similar. Yes, they are. Now there are many different modalities that you can kind of tune in to these root causes. Like, I think there's some truth to hypnotherapy. I think there's some truth to all of these modalities. And I think largely it's, I think, based on the practitioner and their attunement to the client, and their ability to, be objective and really uh, give their energy to the client in sort of an abstract way. There's truth in these somatic healing practices out there. I think even Carl Jung's method may be more long-winded, but I think he's getting to the exact same thing through a more, it's not through any sort of quick processing. Maybe the long, more meaningful path is the Jungian way, I
Yeah.
don't know really, but I love it. And it's all getting at the same thing, and I think there are so many different modalities out there that you can learn. And I think it comes down to the individual, and I think it comes down to the practitioner if you're working with a practitioner. So I love EMDR right now. It's really interesting. I want to learn
Excellent.
more. I just want to keep learning more of these different modalities and see how they all intersect. One I'm sort of eager to learn about is the holographic manipulation therapy, by Dr. Gabe Roberts. I think that's really, really interesting. It kind of blows my mind. I chatted with him on my podcast, and he's all about getting to that touchstone memory, right? And you need to be attuned to beyond the cognitive. So I think a lot of
Yeah.
practitioners will focus on what you can remember, but that touchstone event, I think, goes beyond what you can remember. So I think being attuned to that and working with the frequencies that are being sensed by the individual and really working on that as the touchstone memory, as the touchstone event, that's where that's where the gold is, right? That's where you want to transmute that lead into gold. Because
Totally.
but I think that you made a beautiful point that I've never considered before, with the how it's not just a single root in the ground. There are little things that come out, and I think that there is value in healing that as well. I really like that analogy, and it's really making me think right now. But I try not to think
It
too
did the
much
same thing
while
to
I'm
me when I
talking.
heard it.
So it's great, man. I love that's why I love chatting with you, man. You're awesome. But it's amazing. I think there's so many things to learn, and I think developing that attunement piece is the most important thing as a practitioner. And I think it comes through, many different things, but alignment with God and your purpose and your own path is all part of it. And the individual needs to do that as well, right? So yeah, excited to learn more about it. But EMDR is really cool, man. I really liked it. I had a great Esta Porter did it, Dr. Esta Porter. I was out in Vancouver actually on the other coast there, and it was so nice getting that course. It was amazing. She was fantastic, and that attunement piece was huge. And the individuality of it all is really important now. Um, with any modality, there are drawbacks, but I think again, it comes down to the implementation, the practitioner, and the general understanding and philosophy behind the implementation of it. Because you know, you got to have that, you got to see the greater picture. You can't just address the psychological realm. You need to get deeper. You need to address the spiritual, energetical
Yeah.
portion of our existence. So, yeah, it's cool, man. It's so exciting.
Yeah, well, let's actually turn towards the spiritual. I loved what you were saying earlier when one of your guests had mentioned that you need to like address things in the order of like spirit, mind, body instead of, we always say it kind of rolls off the tongue or we're used to hearing it more of body, mind, spirit, but spirit, mind, body definitely places a whole new spin on order of emphasis because as human beings for so long we've just been tied up very much so in, especially as western cultures, tied up in physicality in the body and empiricism and all these other things. To flip the script and say, well, let's actually look at it from the spiritual is really fascinating. How would you define the spirit given your experience at the present moment? And again, this doesn't need to be like, am I going to be perennially correct for all of eternity? This is just from where you're sitting right now, what does spirit kind of indicate to you?
It's an amazing question. It's an absolutely amazing question. And, you know, the spirit is what you can't explain in my mind. It's what you can't really talk about. It's what you can't grasp through science or pens and papers, or it's just what you can kind of experience it. Like I feel God and the spiritual realm when I'm out in nature and I'm mindful and I'm playing with my dog or spending time with my wife or whatever it is. Even now, chatting with you, Phoenix, I feel it, man. I can feel it. Like I feel some sort of alignment. It's amazing. Like it's unexplainable. It's almost like when people do psychedelics, they're like, I can't tell you what happened.
Yeah, I
Like I
can't
can't
like
explain what
pinpoint it.
happened. You know what I mean? Like you can't put your finger on it. So that's the most roundabout answer I could ever come up with. But that's kind of what I like. It's to put it more concretely, it's aligning with your highest purpose and aligning with some sort of goodness too,
Yeah.
right? I think there's components of self-sacrifice, there's components of helping others, being selfless, and I think there are times where being selfish is important too, putting your an individual above the tribe. There is a necessity for that too. It kind of depends on the moment as well, right? It's being attuned with that moment. But I think it all comes down to sort of aligning with that highest purpose, right? There are certainly ways that we can all cut corners and cheat and get a little bit ahead and maybe break the rules here and there. I'm not talking about laws per se, but God's
Yeah, yeah.
rules more so than anything. There's always ways we can do that. You can always take a little more than you should and give a little less than you'd like to. And Um, but I think, if we're looking at longevity, it's you got to give more than you should and take less than you should, and be better than you should. And I don't know, man. It's just like it's that attunement piece. It's every moment. How can you be a little bit better? I always kind of boil it down to that, being a little bit better in the next moment, and always being aligned with some sort of goodness, because you can be aligned with you know evil, and people do very well in that realm of things as well. They're very successful people. It depends what you want to mean by well there, but there are successful people who have lots of material and money who are very evil. But um, you know, I couldn't sleep at night, and maybe that's just my worldview. Who knows, man? But it's what's most meaningful for me is kind of being on this path that I am right now, and just trying to get better and better, and nicer and happier and more joyful and more pleasant, so everyone else is a little bit more of all that's around me as well. So yeah, there's I don't know. This would be a great follow-up introductory question for my guests. What is the
Yeah,
space?
totally. I think especially for the ones that like, focus on spirit at all. I would love to just see like a few clips of this person's definition, this person's definition, this person's definition, and then just to be able to like find the lowest common denominators between all of that. In fact, if I may, can I reflect back some of the those things that I was hearing you say?
Please.
One, you said, like, I don't know, I feel like I'm closer to God when I'm like out in nature or in the forest. Um, I can't tell you how many people I've talked to say that almost exact same here. That's part of like what my driven what drives me to move way out into the middle of the forest is that I feel a sense of connection to something where I'm not at the top of the chain necessarily, where all these older trees, all these older rivers, all these stones that have been around since God only knows when, that they are the main features, and I'm just a visitor. I'm just an observer. I get to be in a humble role in an ecosystem that could swallow me whole and spit me out in the blink of an eye if it wanted to. And that actually, there's something about that humility that actually causes me to feel, well, I would refer to it, the language that I would use is that it connects me into the source of creation of this planet. When I'm in touch with with water, which has been around since, allegedly, the scientists have said, yeah, everything was hydrogen sulfide, then it turned to water. So at least until, if that theory is correct, at least at that point, millions and millions of years ago, the Appalachian Range where I'm moving, millions and millions and millions of years old. Like, how long has the dirt been there? You know what I mean? And here I am, an individual, not even 40 years old, able to experience this and to be part of this and to have the opportunity to explore its majesty and all of the intricacies that it has. Like, oh my God, it just, the more ecological complexity too. I remember feeling that same way when I was in the Amazon rainforest. It was the exact same feeling. It was like everything here is so insane. Like, I am clearly, it's like the Sesame Street, which of the things is not like the other? That was me. um, so it was really, really cool to be in those environments. And that's really what makes me feel connected and whole to the rest of the planet, and to realize that I evolved out of, or have grown out of, or been created out of, whatever terms we want to use, the same stuff. And that I am supported by, my life is symbiotic and synergistic with these other things. Like it fully connects me into the source of creation, whatever force or whatever being or whatever that might be. So I heard you mention that. And then I also heard you talk about the development of virtue, being a nicer person, being a kinder person, being a more intelligent person. Like, if I had to like succinctly say, well, what are all those things? I would say that's fucking development of virtue right there. And so when we take a look at most religions and most spiritual traditions, they're focusing on something somewhat similar, maybe in different ways, you know. It's like focus over here versus focus over here. But no matter what you focus on, it's getting you to get to some sense of what the source is, whether we're talking about Brahma or Vishnu, whether we're talking about, you know, the Abrahamic God, whether we're talking about these polytheistic godheads, or to the oldest known ancestors that we have, or whatever the case is. It taps us into some sense of origin, and then helps us to develop some sense of virtue and give some sort of compass as to what do I feel my sense of ethics are. We could even say ethics maybe are innate, and so what are my sense of morals? I think the morals, as just as a semantic type of point, morals get oftentimes overlaid over ethics, but like for me, being ethical is infinitely more important, because those are the shared experiences that we'd have. Like, for instance, if there's a young child starving, it is unethical for me to just ignore that. Like, I've got to take care of that. I would not want it to be in that situation. I would not want my child to be in that situation, other people to turn a blind eye. Ergo, I mustn't do that myself. It's just kind of like what goes around comes around. I'd much rather make sure that what comes around is good if I have the opportunity to put goodness back out into the world. So I kind of heard some of those same sentiments being expressed too. Would you disagree or add on to any of those things?
I certainly wouldn't disagree with anything there. I think it was very well put. I think I would also like to listen to a whole bunch of people talk about what spirit is and see the commonalities. I think the nature is a big one. And something I've kind of been talking a lot about lately is the problems with the appeal to nature logical fallacy, at least the misinterpretation of it. And I think so to sort of break it down real quick, people will say that, there's a logical fallacy. They call it appeal to nature. That if we say, you know, what is natural is good and what is unnatural is bad,
Sure, sure,
and
yeah,
that's the logical fallacy. Now, I don't try to commit this fallacy because, in the purest form, what I would say is that what is natural is healthy and what is unnatural is unhealthy. And actually, the original writer on the um, this logical fallacy said that exactly, that that's not a fallacy whatsoever. What is nature? What is natural is absolutely innate. It's understood. It is not foreign to our bodies.
yeah,
Now, of course, drawing the line is a whole other story of when does it become unnatural, because
yeah.
humans are natural and we make, biochemicals, and so where are those unnatural since a natural being made them? Um,
I know
that's sort
that
of a different
that gets
question
real
here.
sticky. That gets
Yeah,
real sticky there.
exactly. Exactly. But to say that what is natural is good, I, to develop some sort of ethics, I don't think that's a great way to go about it, because, if a wild animal sees another starving wild animal,
It
they're
might
going to
just
eat
kill
that
it.
animal.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, there's no ethical, and this, like, we're so fundamentally different from animals in that respect. Although we are nature and we are one with nature, we have to acknowledge that there is this difference in, ethics and morality with humans. And I think that's really, really, and it's obviously something that's been talked about by philosophers for
Totally.
forever.
Yeah. Literally, as far
But
as we go back. Yeah.
as far as we have written documents and stories, it's um, so we can't necessarily appeal to nature in the respect of ethics. When it comes to health, I think that appealing to nature is absolutely the most important thing that we can do, because we are still one with nature. We come from nature. We belong in nature. But when it comes to our ethics, we almost have some sort of higher duty, some sort of higher power there, which
Agreed.
it's so. And it gets into this realm where I'm still kind of thinking a lot about this stuff, and I don't even know if I would be able to continue in a sure manner here, because there's so many different ways that you can approach this topic. But um, maybe I could just give it back to you and hear your thoughts on that.
No, man, as you were talking, I mean, that's absolutely true. And that's kind of why you know, at a certain point, I suppose we kind of have to differentiate some of this work. Um, so here's what I can say I was taught within the alchemical tradition, because, this spirit is like 1/3 of the holy of holies that modern alchemists work with since the time of Paracelsus. We have sulfur, mercury, and salt, which is soul, spirit, and body. Spirit is the animating force of something, is what they always say. It's what animates something, it's what gives life to something. The soul is the volition of the individual. It's like the volition of the thing as well. So it could be of a plant, an animal, a mineral, a metal, or whatever, but it's like what its will is, and also where its talents, its interests, its medicinal energy really is. And we even use the term oftentimes to talk about these things as its medicinal virtue. So we talk about virtue as being part of the soul, but in order to have the disciplines that allow us to build that virtue, that discipline thing happens through verbs. And verbs are actions, and actions need to be animated in order to exist. They are a perpetual state of motion. They are constantly moving. So anything that can channel this, whatever you want to call it. I mean, we were taught that it was like life force energy or whatever. What channels that life force energy to animate the will and the volition of the individual, that is what we would refer to as the spirit animating the soul. And I think that there are a lot of disembodied entities out there that have those two things. They may not necessarily have a physical or a corporeal form, but they definitely have a will and a volition. Like, for instance, the wind, right? I think the wind is something that I have interacted with many, many times. Can you point to the body of the wind for me, though? I can't, but I know that there's force there. I know that there's energy there because it can even produce energy. I've got a windmill right out here, you know? Um, and at the same time, I know that there is a volition of it because it's moving in different directions and it's changing speed, and it has to grow based on displacement and based on temperature dynamics and thermal entropy and all these other things. So there seems to be a soul and there seems to be a spirit to it, but it doesn't necessarily seem to have like a body. It's just a force. So I think that there are a lot of different types of things. I think fire is the same way. All of the elements in their purest form are really spiritual to me. Fire, air, water, earth, and spirit itself, this animating force kind of governing them all. So yeah, it's a very fascinating fascinating thing and somewhat elusive. Of course, in my own philosophy, and especially for my laboratory students, I have to teach about and say what spirit is, but still giving an alchemical textbook definition and giving an experiential definition, there are sometimes differences in those. But I can say that I have cultivated my spirit through discipline. Seems like all of the things that I do regularly or do especially when I don't want to do them, but I know that they're best for me, that's when I experience the most growth and the most recognition, self-recognition of like pushing through and growing. It's like working out some sort of spiritual muscle, if you want to refer to it like that. So yeah, really really fascinating concept. But I would love if you start asking folks, put together a little montage of just like, hey, what is spirit? And let's just see what they say. That montage would be worth its weight in gold, I think.
I agree. I think I'm going to get on that right away.
Yeah, well, I mean, to a certain degree, if we're going to flesh out the idea of how do we take care of spirit so that spirit, mind, body is the order that it comes in. If spirit is elusive, then maybe the ways, until we can flesh this out fully, maybe the ways of interacting with spirit and to focus on that as one of our major components remains elusive as well. And if that's 1/3 of the picture of holistic health, seems kind of important that we start working on this. You know, seems like we should definitely come to some agreement as to what's going on.
Agreed. Yeah. Well, if it's anything like trying to define health, it'll be an
Yeah,
interesting endeavor.
man, seriously, that's
Yeah.
yeah, it's gonna be different subjectively too. And I think, you know, the more that we experience, that's been true in my own journey, is that the more that I experience, the broader my understanding of health becomes. And it just continues to, it's almost kind of like this, what would you say, kind of like an unfolding tesseract that is constantly expanding. The more that I learn, it's like, oh yeah, I've got to incorporate this concept too. Oh yeah, I've got to incorporate this concept. And where does that fit inside of the filing folders that I have? Do I need to expand the filing folders? Do I need to create different structure to do this? Because that's really, I mean, that's really my gig, is just like creating mental filing folders for everything. It's like, unless I have file folders and like a system of organization, it's hard to pass things on. If you can pass on thoughts and ideas though in a kind of compartmentalized way where we understand where things fit, it becomes easier to talk about, and it becomes easier to incorporate things or to know how to add folders and still where to organize them. Kind of creates a really good living tradition, if people can learn to utilize that same system. It's like the Dewey Decimal System. You know, you go to the library anywhere across the United States, and if as long as you know the organization system, you're probably going to be able to find the books at that library that meet the interests that you're looking for. So same concepts as it pertains to health, is how do we like create a system. And for the vast majority of my day, that's all that I'm doing, which I think a lot of people might pity me for. But it's what I'm here to do. It's the thing that fulfills me. So, you know, pity or
That's
not, I'm still doing it.
amazing.
Yeah, man. So, well, that's really cool. Now, you know, we've talked about spirit. We've talked a little bit about, you know, concepts of health and psychology and trauma and things like that. I'm curious though, are there any other elements of terrain work in your year of podcasting now and listening to ideas that just stand out to you and like, this was really poignant. This was something that has really shifted my view on something, some point.
Mhm. Yeah, I got a big one. Um, it was sort of the seeing the flaws in the empirical model. Uh,
Mm,
I learned a lot about logic this year and rationalism, and I think that there's a lot that we can understand a priori, like before observation. I don't think that, I think, I was resistant to this, very resistant to this at the start. Um, the deeper I delve into experiments and them trying to prove certain phenomenon, I mean, there's certainly a time and a place. And I think that if we can truly remain objective in our empirical endeavors, it can be helpful in some respect. I don't know if at least the average human, is absolutely incapable of this. And there have been philosophers that have spoken about this. Even Popper spoke about this, which was his um, whole idea behind falsification, to remove the subjectivity in empiricism.
hmm.
Empiricism is fundamentally theory laden. Even our observations, we try to say that they're objective observations. Often they are completely tainted by our worldview and the theories that we believe in. Often theories are created before observations are made, before experiments are thought up, and we design experiments to prove the theories that we want to be true, correct.
Yeah.
So I think it takes a very, very special person to employ a pure Popperian falsification, empirical perspective. I think it can be done. And I think, again, time and a place for everything. I don't want to say that empiricism is useless. Many people like having some sort of a posteriori experiment to prove something incorrect, to falsify some certain thing, to maybe even prove something, and if that's possible. But just sort of delving into those old philosophers, realizing, if we start at some fundamental basics, if we start at nature and work off of that and deduce logically from that, I think we can get our answers. And at this point, my perspective on health doesn't need any more experiments. I don't need to understand health through any more experiments. And I don't think, looking back, that any experiments have really shaped health in my mind. I think that it's all come from some sort of rationalism, understanding that the fundamental natural principles are ones that we should live by. Um, and trying to create a system or a theory or a framework based off of that, I think is going to be very, very helpful. Again, I don't want to bash on empiricism too much, because there's always a time and a place for it. I just found, for me, it's not been all that helpful, because what I thought was true at one point, because of empiricism, just gets falsified at another point. Even when it comes to things like, I claim, like, oh well, you know let's take a big one. If Can I say the word, the injection word?
Yeah.
I
Well,
don't know.
we could at least do that. We could say that.
Yeah. Well, we'll call them cupcakes. That's what I usually do. So
There we go.
people will say that cupcakes are so toxic, right? Like, and that they cause all this disease. It's like, I was fully injected with cupcakes my whole life, and I never got any autoimmune diseases. So there's obviously some sort of falsification, that it's not like every time somebody gets it, it causes an illness, right? It's not this toxicity is introduced and this illness occurs. It's not that black and white. You can run all the experiments you want. There's always going to be a small group of people that don't respond.
Yeah.
There's always outliers. So there's always going to be something else, another role being played. And so when it comes down to it, obviously these toxicities and these cupcakes certainly play a role in some certain cases, right? There are cases
Sure.
where it may purely be caused by that. But I think with our discussion on the psychological realm, and its contribution to disease, I think that is one of the biggest confounding variables that cannot be accounted for through empiricism, because I think psychology is not an empirical endeavor whatsoever. I think you can only understand psychology through human action, through praxeology, as the Austrian economists would say. You can only understand it through rationalism, right? So uh, every single, if you study Jung, Freud, Adler, any psychoanalyst out there, any psychological theory out there, it's not empirical. None of it is empirical. And that was the biggest criticism on psychoanalysis, on Jung, on
Totally.
Freud. It was all that they were quacks and they weren't based on scientific experiments. Well, even now, the science that they run in the field of psychology is largely irreproducible. Over 90% of studies done in psychology cannot be reproduced. And reproducibility is supposed to be the cornerstone of science. Now, I think there is reproducibility in falsifications. And so what I will say with empiricism, you need to be employing a pure falsification. I think Popper was absolutely correct. But I don't think that's how science is conducted whatsoever. And I don't think empiricism is helpful, because I think it tends towards dogma. And I think it just, the stories that we tell about the data are going to be told based on the current scientific consensus, no matter how wrong it is. It's all theory laden. And I think getting back to the most pure deductive standpoint, pure rationalism standpoint, is fundamentally important when it comes to health, because the psyche comes before the biological. Energy comes before biology. And I don't think that we can understand this stuff through empiricism alone. Maybe it's confirmatory, but I don't think that it's enough to create our theories. I think we need to approach it logically before we do empirically.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's actually a really big one, is taking a step back from empiricism. And even, when we have these things in science, we still refer to that as empirical evidence, oftentimes not empirical proof. And that's an important thing. Like, we have to remember that no matter how much data we have that might point to a certain direction, we need to look at that from a different angle and see if the direction it's pointing towards is actually even the same. Because evidence can be, depending on how it gets viewed, be evidence for a lot of different things as well. And it doesn't always like point towards where we think that it might, especially when there's like one group of scientists looking at it this particular way and getting caught up in the way that they're doing it, and in their interpretations, which include some form of confirmation bias, right? If we can step out of that and say, well, okay, but what happens if I look at the same bit of evidence slightly differently? Does it cast a new projection and a new direction that we could interpret this in? Evidence, just like in court, can help to say that something is more likely, or it can say that based on that, something is less likely to be existing, and it's really just an argument. And even in law, we have to take evidence into the concept of, is there enough here to make a strong case, or is there actually proof? Evidence never stands that great unless there's so much overwhelming evidence to a certain degree that we can say, yeah, that's more than likely. But again, you brought up an important point that if you look at that 30, 40, 50 years later, people might say, well, that's not the same way I'm viewing the same evidence. Take a look at this other thing. And here we are, even with cholesterol and heart disease. That's a good one, right? It's like, I grew up my whole time saying, as a kid, low fat, low cholesterol, drink your skim milk and, do all these other things and cut out high cholesterol foods. And, now people are saying, well, no, the cholesterol is not the main component here that is actually causing high blood pressure or heart disease at all. There may be contributing factors in the plaque, but it's calcium that is building up on the arterial walls, primarily either due to too much vitamin D without vitamin K2 in the system, or too much calcium without either vitamin D or vitamin K2 in the system, that are creating arterial plaque. And then all sorts of molecules, not just cholesterol, free floating fat, glycogen molecules, glucose, things like, they're all going to get caught in there and further constrict and create arterial plaque. And then that's what ends up contributing. It has nothing to do with cholesterol. So yeah,
I think that's really a really good point there too with the cholesterol. It's like, why did we need a study to tell us that? Because we didn't have heart disease and people ate animals forever.
yes.
You just need to look at nature and deduce from that, right? And another point that I want to make that I was thinking there was, I've been toying with this idea and I'm kind of developing a video on it right now for like my YouTube channel. It's alchemical logic. And it's, I think that the alchemists understood kind of what I'm talking about here, because they worked from fundamental principles. Like if you look at the Hermetic principles, these are all laws. I don't think that I don't think that we could change these laws, and I don't think they change over time. And I think if you can work logically from those fundamental principles, I think there's a lot that we can learn rationally from that. But even then, they're empirical experiments. The alchemists understood a lot, and they spoke blatantly in story to describe their works, right? And correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. You're the expert on this topic, but they weren't like they weren't trying to come from the point we're at now, where we're like, this is fact, this is exactly what all of this is. Like this, we can name these chemicals in the body, and we can name all this stuff that we can't actually see. We can see them through different NMR spectrometry and all these different techniques that we've created, all these technologies, and we know all of this stuff. It's very dogmatic now, whereas the alchemist, I feel like, wasn't taking that perspective. Like they were writing blatantly in story because they knew that they were telling stories about the observations that are objective, but once you tell the story about it, you're starting to get into induction. And so they told a blatant story to get the point across. It's like if you're trying to learn about alchemy, you can't just go and read about it and take it all concretely. You know, like you can't just say like these are the facts. Like these are the absolute facts. Because the facts are part of that underlying piece that we can't really talk about. It's the same as what I'm talking about with spirit. It's like the objective reality and truth is beyond what we can actually explain. So we can try to tell stories about our reality and our realm and um but it just kind of comes down again to like you can't even talk about it. It's something you can't fully grasp. Like we could tell a good story about it and we could try to get a point across, but if you don't understand that underlying truth that
Yes.
can't really be explained, it can only be understood, you're missing the whole point.
Man, when you're saying that, it's like these types of things get relinquished. It's the difference between prose and poetry, really. It's like with prose, there's a story, there's characters, plot, etc. It leads you through some sequence that you're like, oh yeah, I'm familiar with. With poetry, it can be so abstract that unless you can tap into the essence of that poem or that poesy, you're not gonna get it. And I think it's the same thing. You were saying
It's a really cool analogy.
experience. It's like, experience trumps empiricism when it comes to understanding the ineffable, the undescribable. You can have an experience with it, just like we were talking about with psychedelics earlier too. It's like you can have an experience, but it's so beyond words. Like I could tell you what I saw, and that does not give you the transmission that I received. um I think that that's a really important thing, is that a vast portion even of our human experience is still indescribable and therefore unrelatable. And in some ways, therefore, the individual goes through an individual experience. And perhaps the more we dive into that, the more we would even refer to that, like the old philosophers would, as the process of individuation, where we become wholly and fully ourselves through the ineffable experiences we have. But to go back to the alchemical literature thing, you're entirely right about that. And I'm constantly yeah, all 25 of me, myself, there we go. Let's use proper terminology here. Um, I put myself into the shoes of these old alchemists because they were working with things that were produced, like for instance, in Italy, Rome, Spain, Portugal, different places like this in the Mediterranean. There's plenty of grapes and vineyards for centuries at that point. These homies are taking wine, and then they're like, I wonder what else I can do with all of this wine. And they end up, oh, well, I can distill a spirit out of it. Now they just created ethanol. How did they describe ethanol without the terms ethanol or without the understanding of what it does? They just say it's a spirit. It animates things, because if I pour this over this, look what happens. It like catalyzes this reaction. And they utilize imagery, typically mythopoetic imagery from all different cultures. That's what makes it such a hodgepodge of difficult interpretation, really. Anything that they were educated in, they'll pull from it and say, you know what, this reminds me of the flying of the doves of Diana, or this reminds me of, this type of thing. And you have to understand the essence of it spiritually. And they even will try to say that it comes off really haughty and like very egotistical, where they're like, if by the grace of God you could possibly ever understand this, and if God graces you with the understanding, then you too will arrive at a similar conclusion. But if you go through their work, and like you said, either by the grace of God or through initiation, somebody else showing you, then you get the opportunity to see the same things that they were seeing and what they were elucidating, like maybe lead acetate crystals, their green color and nature, looking at those as a green lion, or in other different works you would say that same thing about green vitriol, for instance, that this is also the green lion. And so they would have all of these like really interesting ways of looking at things. And unfortunately, they weren't chatting each other up. They were not like, hey, I saw this thing, do this thing this way and see what you get. No, okay, no, because they didn't have phones. They would write a book about what they were doing, and some other person would pick up the book and be like, he doesn't know his head from his ass. Like, here's the real way that it shows up. It's like, and so when we're like reading alchemical literature, one of the things that people really even need to be aware of is that from person to person, from time period to time period, and from locale to locale, and the different traditions that may have existed. Alchemical literature, when they say one thing, like the doves of Diana, I can point to at least 3 to 4 different things that show up, like the doves of Diana, or a swan flying off of a lake. One of my homies, Lynn Osborne, he's a really great alchemist. He's in his 70s now. He published a book called The Green Lion and the Metamorphosis of, maybe it was called The Metamorphosis of the Green Lion, something about mineral gardening or something like that, right? He shows how we can take just vinegar and ash and end up combining them together and creating this cool multi-metallic acetate just from the ash of the grapes. Because the grapes themselves produce an ash that has, calcium and manganese and magnesium, potassium, all in pretty decent quantities. Like I think it's like 20% by volume calcium, things like that. Most tree and wood ash. And then, when you take the juice of the grape and you ferment it and then double ferment it, first an anaerobic fermentation followed by an aerobic fermentation, then you end up getting vinegar, and then you can purify that vinegar through both freezing as well as distillation, get that up to like 100%, and then utilize this glacial acetic acid on this ash in order to create metallic acetates that are growing together. They're like co-metallic acetates: magnesium, calcium, potassium, manganese, acetate. And the way that they grow is this interesting thing where they like kind of grow up and they fan out. And he's like, yeah, I'm pretty sure Ripley was referring to this as the white swan, because it's mostly white and it's coming up out of, it looks like it's coming up out of the water and spreading its wings and starting to fly away. And so he takes all of these descriptions and he ends up showing like, oh, here's the way that we do this. But I think it's that same thing. If we don't have common terminology to help understand, or common terminology even for the processes that to get to that point, how the hell do you explain it? How could you possibly transmit what you just experienced and what you like? Surely it's a gift from God. That's the way it would be perceived, right? Like, surely I was just divinely inspired to do this thing, and I saw this thing, and it's beautiful, and it has medicinal merit too if you prepare it like this. And here you, but you can't, like, these first alchemists had no other words to try and explain this to other individuals at all. I think they really did their very best. And eventually that led to, Robert Boyle and others being like, yeah, I'm very skeptical that all there is sulfur, mercury, salt, fire, air, water, and earth. Because if we do it like this, and this is a different salt than this, but we're still just calling it salt, and, and so chemistry is born. But yeah, fascinating concepts all the way around the board.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what have you got coming up in the pipeline next? You're now happily married, from what I understand.
Yeah,
And,
very much so.
And you're about to graduate. You're about to get your degree.
Yeah. So I'm done in December, so it's pretty exciting. Of my, modern academia degree, doing a master's, so that's fun. Definitely learning lots at school. No, it's great. I'm working with a lot of people right now. I am learning a lot. And I'm starting my own practice. So I kind of doing the business side of that. So that's really fun. Yeah, definitely working, sort of addressing that psychological realm, sneaking in the spiritual where I can. I think incorporating a lot of things like wilderness therapy is going to be big for my practice. I'll probably see clients online as well, and just sort of encourage that sort of behavior. And getting outside and moving and all these fundamental principles that, I think we can all kind of agree on are more healthy: eating whole foods, getting some sunlight, going outside, and
Yeah.
things that the modern man doesn't do anymore. Spending less time on your phone is a big one. I took a pretty significant break from all social medias there, so that was pretty fun. Except for the podcast, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it's exciting. Start the business, it's big. I'm back on social media now, so I'm posting again, trying to grind out on YouTube, grow a little bit there. That's been fun. I like making longer form content. But yeah, there's still lots to learn, and I don't think that's ever going to stop. So that's sort of the big one. Yeah, things are going really well right now, though. Yeah, the business is going to be a big one once that's up and running. I love working with people. I work with people for free right now, and I still love it. So that's a pretty good test for yourself. If you want to figure out where your passions lie, do things for free and figure out what is still exciting to get up and go do every single day. Even better yet, if you can pay $4,000 a semester and do it, it's even more meaningful. So, yeah,
Totally.
that's where I'm at.
Man, super cool, super cool. Well, I'm glad to hear that things are all moving in an awesome and fun direction for you over there. Who do you plan on specializing, or what do you plan on specializing in once you start your practice? What's that all about? Or are you still in the midst of figuring it all out?
No, Phoenix, I really want to work with. I love working with young men and women even. I feel like obviously I have a little bit of experience in that area, trying to find meaning. I think that's really, I think that's what a lot of people are lacking, is trying to find some sort of meaning and purpose. And I was there. I was very, very lost halfway through my degree. And I think that I could offer some sort of help in that area. Um, and the other specialty that I really want to address is trauma, because I think it's so fundamental to all health in general, and
Yeah,
just well-being in general. Maybe you don't have physical health ailments, but if you want to improve your life, you can remove the maladaptive complexes and increase positive complexes or adaptations, right? So that's sort of the work that I really want to focus on. Call it trauma. That's sort of the popular buzzword, however you want to kind of put it. I think it's addressing things that don't serve you, and building up the things that are going to serve you, and getting yourself on that path of meaning. I think that's fundamental. And yeah, so that's sort of the main area that I'd really like to work in. That's sort of what I'm most passionate about. Obviously, health is, I think, a byproduct of that. I think if you align with your highest purpose, your health tends to flow. Um, and I don't necessarily want to do like health coaching, because I say, if you ask me how do you be healthy, I'll tell you exactly what I think. It's, you're not going to necessarily find it in a supplement or a parasite protocol. You need to get outside in nature. And there are time and place for both of those things, and there's even time and a place for a pharmaceutical drug. If you're
sure,
in
yeah.
a certain point of disease, I'll certainly make that distinction there. But generally, that's not my scope, right? I don't know how to address that. That's not my field. So I'm going to tell you, go outside, be one with nature, and get back to those natural principles. Turn your Wi-Fi off at night, get rid of those non-native electromagnetic frequencies. Eat whole food. I'm not going to tell you to eat the different diet. I'm not going to tell you to go vegan or carnivore. I'm going to tell you to eat whole food, and whatever foods resonate with you, that's what you got to eat. And maybe they don't resonate with you, so you got to cut out the processed garbage and maybe do a little fast. It's about getting back to nature. So that's why I'm not trying to work directly into the health coaching field,
Sure,
whatever that
yeah.
kind of means. But I think people have more trouble working with their underlying traumas. I know, I've had my troubles with them, and, I'm still growing and learning and working on myself all the time. And I've tried, really hard to do it all by myself. And sometimes our minds put blocks up. So it can be really good to work with someone. And um, the field of psychotherapy kind of scares me, because I can see the state of the practitioners, and boy, oh boy, it makes me worried. I just a lot of people becoming dependent on their therapists and things like that. And I don't like
Yeah.
that at all. and a lot of ineffective ways of dealing with things. I think that if you only address things from the surface, it's something's just going to keep surfacing. So there's a time
Yeah.
and place to address the surface level symptoms, but I think with everything, we got to get to the root cause. And that's sort of my main philosophy. So working with that trauma, with those initial events that shape our worldview, that's kind of where I'm at, where I'm focusing.
Super cool. Now, I'm assuming that once you get your practice up and running, you'll make some sort of announcement. Where do you plan on making that announcement that you're doing things? Have you already thought about it? Are you only going to see people in person? Are you going to do telecounseling type of visits? What's your projection on it? I mean, on that field.
Yeah, I want to see people in person because I love that actual interaction, but
Yeah.
there's a certain power to online as well. It's the way of the modern world. I'll certainly offer that as well. I'll be announcing stuff kind of everywhere. I'll probably make a YouTube video on it and maybe a short podcast on my philosophy surrounding, mental health and my practice, and I'll be announcing it on Instagram for sure. So kind of anywhere you can follow me. I'm sure I'll let you know somehow that that's up and running. So yeah, it won't be hard to miss if you're following me in any way.
Cool. Which, by the way, to all of our listeners out there, I do strongly suggest. I myself derive a lot of pleasure from listening to the various podcasts that Liev puts out. Most of my listeners know that I am not a podcast listener. I don't really have much time where I'm not running experimentation or working in the lab or other things where I need to be focused, where I can just listen to information and really take it in on the level that I would like to. So I don't listen to a lot, but yours is one that I do listen to, and I'll try and pop in pretty frequently. So yeah, definitely stay tuned to the Beyond Terrain podcast. I think it's, in my opinion, it's one of the better podcasts out there. You're a great host. You have some really amazing guests. You go into depth about some really fun topics. Man, you've got something really great going on. I'm just so glad that you got into this, and it's really glad that you reached out to me and pretty early on and said, "Hey, Fee, do you want to be a guest?" Because it turned me on to you, which, as we know, I absolutely adore, and to all of the guests that you had on too. It's extraordinary the work that you've done too. It's just popping in and doing this for an entire year with the regularity that you have on the caliber that you have. It's very impressive to me, man.
Appreciate it very much. It means a lot coming from you, Phoenix. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure, brother. My pleasure. Well, we're getting to the end of our interview here. Are there any other final thoughts or any other ideas that you might want to leave us with?
We covered a good chunk in this episode. I loved it, man. It was great. I guess final thoughts is I want to have you back on my podcast, so I hope we could set that up pretty soon. It's been almost a year, man, because like I said, you were one of the first guests. You were one of those guys that I was listening to that was sort of inspirational to me too to start in the podcast. So I really appreciated you kind of taking a chance on me at the start there. It was still a pretty small podcast, and man, it just meant a lot to me then, and it means a lot to me now that we're still connected. And yeah, I just appreciate you so much, and I appreciate you taking the time to having me on and allowing me to share my message with your people. So it's great, man. Everything's cool. I can't wait to have you back on.
Oh man, well, thank you. Yeah, as you know, I would be honored to be back on. You have such great questions and just fun conversation, to turn an Irish phrase. It's like, it's always just good crack anytime that we're chatting together. So
Agreed.
absolutely love it. Always, brightens up my day, and I feel light, and all the time. Anytime I even just think of you or watch you, I mean, you've got an infectious sense of happiness and joy that radiates out from you that just stays with me for a long time. So it's really good, brother. All right. Well, I want to thank you for coming on, Liev, and let's
Always.
definitely get together again soon. To all of our listeners out there, thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed the content in this podcast, let's please pass it forward. Try and think of 3 people that will really like the content here. Pass it on to them, and if they like it, give them the charge to pass it on to 3 other people. If we keep doing that, we'll be able to get ideas and information out there in a really awesome way in a very short period of time, in such a way that we can begin to collectively noodle on things and design a future for ourselves that actually meets our growing needs and helps to establish a firm foundation of ideas, which we can use as a springboard to communicate with one another. I think that this type of thing is definitely the next evolution of the human paradigm, is moving into this concept of ideas and fluidly navigating between ideas and theories and thoughts. So definitely be sure to pass this out. And if you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to like, subscribe, hit all of the buttons. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to comment down in the description areas and in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts on these types of ideas. And as always, thank you guys so much for joining in. Once again, Liev, thank you so much. Keep well, brother, and I hope to hear from you again here soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, brother.